A single, unauthorized piece of piano wire saved 100 American pilots and changed the course of aerial combat in World War II. It wasn't a new weapon, but a hidden flaw in the P-38 Lightning, making it a death trap against the Japanese Zero. This story, though a popular fictional account, reveals why the formidable P-38, fast and powerful, couldn't turn with a Zero, and why American pilots like Robert Hayes were dying daily. You're about to hear how one mechanic defied every regulation to secretly fix this fatal flaw, transforming a failing fighter into a Zero killer. At 7:42 a.m., August 17, 1943, WWII Airfield. Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, 0 kills, 6 missions flown, prepared for a flight straight into 18 Japanese Zero fighters. Technical Sergeant James McKenna had spent 8 months maintaining these P-38s, but this morning he'd done something far more. Picture this. The P-38 Lightning, a twin-engine fighter with that distinctive twin-boom design. It was incredibly fast in a straight line, an absolute beast when flying high above the clouds. But despite all its power, the P-38 carried a deadly secret, a fatal flaw that was claiming American pilots' lives day after day. The problem? It simply couldn't outturn a Japanese Zero. The Zero, lighter and far more agile, could complete a full horizontal turn in half the time a P-38 required in a dogfight. This wasn't just a disadvantage. This difference, out there in the sky, meant certain death. American doctrine was crystal clear. P-38 pilots were explicitly told, never, ever turn with a Zero. Don't even try to outmaneuver them. The strategy was simple. Leverage your speed, use your altitude. You dive in, take your shot, then climb straight out, executing a classic hit and run. The cardinal rule? Do not get caught in a turning fight. Lieutenant Hayes, a good pilot, had followed that doctrine 5 times. 5 times it had failed him. The Zero pilots were just too cunning. They would expertly bait American pilots into those deadly turns. Then, with terrifying precision, they'd cut inside their turning radius, get right on their tail, and shoot them straight out of the sky. The grim statistics spoke for themselves. The 5th Air Force had already lost 37 P-38s in just the past 6 weeks. The vast majority were shot down after being trapped in turning engagements, fights they simply couldn't escape. McKenna, a seasoned mechanic, had witnessed far too many of these pilots perish. Good men, some barely more than kids, would climb into their P-38s with a brave confidence, only to return in a coffin or, more often, not return at all. The official training manual and the instructors all pointed fingers at pilot error. They claimed these young men simply weren't following doctrine. But McKenna, he knew better. He knew the problem wasn't with the pilots. The real culprit? It was the control cables. Specifically, the P-38's aileron control cables, the ones that allow the plane to roll, snaked through those distinctive twin booms, back to the tail section, then forward again through a series of pulleys to the wing control surfaces. And here was the kicker. The entire cable system had slack. Not a lot, maybe just 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. But that tiny, seemingly insignificant bit of slack created a crucial, deadly delay between when a pilot moved the stick and when the ailerons actually responded. At high speeds, it wasn't a big deal, but at lower speeds, especially during those critical, hard-turning maneuvers, that fraction of a second delay wasn't just an inconvenience. It was literally the difference between successfully rolling inside a Zero's turn and getting mercilessly shot down. McKenna had actually brought this exact issue up with the engineering officer a full 2 months prior. The response? Cold, hard bureaucracy. The officer insisted the cable tension was within specifications. Factory tolerances, he said, allowed for that slack. Changing it would instantly void the aircraft's warranty. And besides, no field mechanic had the authority to modify flight control systems. That required engineering approval, all the way from Lockheed, 7,000 miles away in California. So, McKenna did the unthinkable. He did something that flagrantly violated every single regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual. He found a piece of piano wire salvaged from a damaged aircraft, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a distinctive Z shape, and then, with quiet determination, installed it as a makeshift tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron control cable. The entire, unauthorized modification took just 8 minutes. Just 0.4 pounds of extra tension was added to that cable. It completely took out the slack. Nobody even noticed. The inspection crew that morning wasn't looking at cable tension. Their focus was on things like engine oil levels and ammunition loads. McKenna, he just stayed silent. He watched Hayes taxi out onto the runway, watched him lift off, and then watched that P-38 disappear into the morning sky, heading straight towards those Japanese fighters. What was about to unfold in the next 17 minutes would fundamentally change the way every single P-38 in the Pacific Theater would fly from then on. The very first pilot McKenna lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chen on July 9, 1943. Chen had only been in the theater for 3 short weeks. McKenna had personally worked on his aircraft every single morning, and they'd often talk about California. Chen was from Sacramento, McKenna from Long Beach, and both had worked on cars before the war. Chen took off at 6:15 a.m. for a fighter sweep. He returned 2 hours later, his left boom sporting 3 fresh bullet holes, and a chilling story about a Zero that had managed to get inside his turn. Chen explained he'd tried to roll out and dive away, just like the manual instructed, but the plane felt incredibly slow to respond. It was as if there was a noticeable delay between his stick movement and the aircraft actually rolling. That Zero nearly got him. His wingman shooting it off his tail was the only thing that saved him. McKenna examined the bullet holes. They were tightly grouped. Perfect deflection shooting. The Zero pilot had led Chen perfectly, anticipating his aircraft's exact position. But that shouldn't have been possible if Chen had rolled hard and dived immediately. Not unless the airplane had delayed just long enough for the Zero to get that perfect lead. Chen never flew again. His P-38 went back to the depot for repairs, and McKenna never saw him after that. 3 weeks later, the news came. Chen had been killed flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. The same story. Caught in a turning fight, couldn't roll out fast enough. Then came the second pilot, Captain William Morrison. Morrison was a seasoned flight leader, experienced, with 11 kills under his belt. He knew the P-38 inside and out, understood its limitations, and flew incredibly smart. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison bagged 1 Zero on his first pass. As he came around for another run, 2 Zeros reversed right onto him. McKenna later heard the radio traffic. Morrison attempted to roll inverted and execute a split S maneuver, calling out that his controls felt mushy. The Zeros stayed right with him through the entire maneuver, shooting him down at just 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman watched, reporting that it looked like Morrison's plane just wasn't reacting fast enough, almost as if he was wrestling the controls. Morrison died in that crash. His crew chief, a Texan named Rodriguez, was a good friend of McKenna's. Rodriguez was absolutely convinced something was wrong with Morrison's P-38. After they recovered the wreckage, he checked everything: engine settings, control surface rigging, cable tensions, you name it. Everything was within spec. Nothing, officially, was wrong with that airplane. The official report concluded pilot error. But Rodriguez didn't believe it for a second. Neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had seen 17 pilots die. Some were close friends he knew well. Most he'd only met briefly during pre-flight checks. But he'd worked on every single one of their aircraft, signed off their maintenance logs, watched them taxi out, watched them take off. Some came back. Many didn't. The ones who did return told the same unsettling story. The P-38 felt sluggish in hard maneuvering, like there was a slight, frustrating lag between their control input and the aircraft's actual reaction. Most pilots just chalked it up to the plane's nature. A heavy fighter, big control surfaces, so some delay was expected. But McKenna knew, deep down, that wasn't normal. He'd felt that exact delay with his own hands when he worked on those control cables. That tiny, almost imperceptible bit of slack in the system. He started paying closer attention to the sound the cables made when he tensioned them during maintenance. There was a specific tone, a distinct, low twang when you plucked a properly taut cable. Loose cables sounded different. McKenna could hear the difference. And every single P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose. Still within official specs, yes, but loose. He mentioned this to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison's death. Rodriguez asked, "So, what can we do about it?" McKenna replied, "Nothing official, but unofficially, there's a solution. It just requires breaking regulations that could get us both court-martialed." It wasn't that American pilots didn't know what to do. They knew. Every single briefing hammered it home. Every training flight drilled it into them. Never turn with a zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Hit and run. The doctrine was crystal clear. The problem was that combat didn't follow doctrine. Take Lieutenant Robert Hayes. He'd been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old, a farm kid from Iowa. He'd flown 6 combat missions and had 0 kills. Not because he was a bad pilot, but because he followed the rules. And those very rules kept putting him in positions where he simply couldn't get a shot. On his 3rd mission, Hayes executed a textbook dive on a zero. He plummeted from altitude, building up a blistering 400 miles per hour, just as the manual instructed, coming in hot from the sun. He locked the zero in his gun sight, began to pull lead for deflection. But in a flash, the zero snap-rolled left and dove away. Hayes instinctively tried to follow, but his P-38 wallowed into the turn, heavy and sluggish, like slogging through thick mud. By the time his aircraft finally responded and pointed where he needed it, the zero had vanished. Hayes pulled out, frustrated, and climbed back to altitude. Not a single shot fired. The 4th mission proved even more harrowing. Hayes and his wingman ambushed 2 zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes squeezed off the first burst, but missed. The zero immediately reversed hard right. Hayes rolled to pursue when suddenly his wingman's frantic voice cut through the radio. 2 more zeros coming in from above. Hayes desperately tried to roll back level and dive away. The P-38 responded yes, but agonizingly slowly. Just that agonizing fraction of a second allowed one of the diving zeros to unleash a 3-second burst directly into Hayes's right boom. Those 20mm cannon shells didn't penetrate, but they shook Hayes to his core, scaring him so badly he broke off the engagement entirely, limping for home with smoke billowing from his engines. Then came the 5th mission. Hayes watched his wingman die. His name was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, just 21 years old, from Boston. They'd gone through training side by side. On August 14th, Parker got separated from their formation during a brutal dogfight over Finschhafen. 2 Zeros latched onto his tail. Parker threw everything he had at them, hard rolls, desperate reversals, frantic scissor maneuvers. But the Zeros were glued to him, mirroring every single move. Hayes heard Parker's voice on the radio, calling for help. He heard the raw panic. He heard Parker cry out that his airplane wasn't turning fast enough. He heard the distinct sound of gunfire, and then he heard Parker scream. After that, only silence. Hayes didn't sleep a wink that night, neither did most of the squadron. Parker's bunk remained starkly empty. His personal effects were meticulously packed up and shipped back home. His P-38 was officially logged as a combat loss. Yet, the maintenance records showed no mechanical issues whatsoever. The official cause? Pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna, the mechanic, had personally worked on Parker's aircraft just that morning. Everything was absolutely perfect. Engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension, all precisely within specification. The airplane, by all accounts, was fine, but Parker was dead anyway, and McKenna, deep down, knew exactly why. That minuscule fraction of a second delay in the controls, that almost imperceptible bit of slack that the manual deemed acceptable. It wasn't acceptable. It had killed Parker, just as it had killed Morrison and Chen and 14 other pilots before them. And the worst part? The smell. Every single morning McKenna entered the maintenance area, that pervasive odor of aviation fuel, hot metal, and hydraulic fluid would fill his nostrils, a constant, sickening reminder. It was that unmistakable smell of aircraft getting ready for combat. Some of those planes, well, they'd make it back. Others wouldn't. And there McKenna would be, bright and early the next morning, breathing in those same smells, working on more planes, watching more young pilots head out to machines that, sometimes, just couldn't respond quickly enough to save their lives. Then, on the evening of August 16th, a pilot named Hayes showed up in the maintenance area. He found McKenna hunched over his assigned P-38. Hayes looked at him, asking if there was anything McKenna could possibly do to make that airplane roll faster, anything at all. He didn't care about regulations, Hayes insisted. He just wanted a fighting chance. McKenna looked back at Hayes, and he saw it all, the fear, the raw desperation. He saw a kid who knew, deep down, he was going to die if something didn't change. "Come back in the morning," McKenna told him. "I'll see what I can do." That night, McKenna worked alone. The maintenance hangar grew quiet after 11 o'clock. Most of the crew had already gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the soft buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air hung heavy with the smell of engine oil and tropical humidity. He carefully pulled the inspection panel off the left boom of Hayes's P-38. The metal was still warm, holding the lingering heat from the day's sun. Inside, he could see the aileron control cable running through a series of pulleys stretching back towards the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled. He felt it immediately, the slack. Maybe 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension finally caught. His hands were already caked in grease, and his fingers ached from a full day of maintenance. But he felt that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. He remembered the piano wire. It came from a salvaged P-38 that had ground-looped 2 weeks prior. The aircraft was scrap.
But McKenna had scavenged useful parts before it shipped out, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from its rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag, not really knowing why, until now. Now he understood. He sat down on the hangar floor, the wire and a pair of pliers in his hands, and began to bend it into a Z shape. The wire was incredibly stiff, fighting him, resisting the pliers. His hands slipped not once but twice, cutting his thumb on the second attempt. The blood made the wire slippery, but he just wiped it on his coveralls and kept going. It took him a painstaking 8 minutes to get the bend just right. That Z shape would act as an inline tensioner, adding just enough preload to the cable to completely eliminate that dangerous slack. Installing it, however, proved even harder. The space inside the boom was incredibly tight.
McKenna had to maneuver with one hand, all while trying to hold a flashlight steady with the other. The beam, of course, kept moving. Shadows danced wildly across the complex cable system. McKenna's shoulder was jammed hard against the boom, a sharp metal edge digging into his arm. He could feel sweat trickling down his back, even in the cool night air. Carefully, he disconnected the cable right at the pulley junction. His fingers, trembling slightly, fumbled with the clevis pen, and he dropped it. He heard it clatter and bounce, vanishing somewhere deep within the boom structure. 5 agonizing minutes he spent, blindly feeling around in the dark, until, finally, his fingers closed around it. The entire time, his heart was absolutely hammering. He knew the stakes. If the engineering officer caught him making unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he was looking at a court-martial, a possible dishonorable discharge, maybe even prison time. But Hayes wouldn't make it if McKenna didn't act. He carefully positioned the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, then reconnected the cable. The fit was incredibly tight. He had to really force that clevis pin into place. But when it finally seated with a satisfying click, he tested the tension by hand, giving the cable a firm tug. Not an ounce of slack. The control surface responded instantly. Perfect. McKenna swiftly replaced the inspection panel, gathered his tools, and meticulously wiped the blood from both the wire and his hands. He slipped out of the hangar at 01:15. The tropical night outside was thick with humidity and eerily still. Then, in the distance, he heard them, aircraft engines. Japanese night raiders, most likely. The chilling sound made his stomach clench. He had just modified a critical flight control system without any authorization, used a non-standard part, and violated at least a dozen regulations. If this modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash, and McKenna would be solely responsible. But if it held, Hayes just might live. McKenna returned to his bunk, but sleep was impossible. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn. At 6:30 a.m., he made his way to the flight line. He watched the ground crew fuel and arm Hayes's P-38. He watched Hayes himself walk out for his pre-flight briefing, then saw him climb into the cockpit. At 7:42, Hayes's aircraft lifted off. McKenna stood rooted to the flight line, watching the P-38 climb steadily into the morning sky. He watched it join formation with 16 other aircraft, then watched them all turn northwest, heading straight toward Japanese airspace. And then, all he could do was wait. The engagement began at 8:14. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 zeros at 13,000 feet, high above the Huon Gulf. The morning sun was perfectly behind them, an ideal setup for a diving attack. Hayes, flying in the number 3 position, heard his element leader call out, "Bounce." They rolled in. Hayes singled out a 0 at the very back of the enemy formation. He dove hard from altitude, rapidly building speed to 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger and larger in his gun sight. He could clearly make out the painted rising sun emblem on its fuselage. Hayes glimpsed the enemy pilot's head through the canopy. He slammed the trigger. The P-38's 4.50 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon roared to life, spitting a torrent of lead. Tracers streaked forward, but most went wide. A handful sparked against the Zero's wing, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. The Zero snapped right and dove hard. Hayes rolled to follow, and that's when he felt it. The P-38 responded instantly. No hesitation, no lag whatsoever. The moment the stick moved, the aircraft rolled. Hayes had never experienced his P-38 handling like this before. It was as if the plane had been anticipating his every command, executing them the very second he thought them. He snapped into a 90-degree roll in what felt like half the usual time, dropping his nose. The Zero filled his sight picture perfectly. He squeezed the trigger again, unleashing a 3-second burst. The rounds ripped across the Zero's fuselage, walking a deadly path from tail to cockpit. The enemy engine erupted in a fiery explosion, shrapnel tearing away. The aircraft flipped inverted and plunged toward the jungle below, leaving a thick trail of black smoke. His first kill. But there was no time for celebration. His wingman's voice crackled. "Zeros, diving from above!" Hayes glanced up, spotting 3 enemy fighters screaming down in a shallow dive, closing fast. They'd just watched him take out their comrade. Now they were hungry for revenge. Hayes slammed the throttles forward, pulling into a climb. But the Zeros, with their diving speed, were rapidly gaining. They'd be on him in mere seconds. His only chance was to reverse course and engage. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to keep climbing, to run. That was the textbook doctrine. But today, following doctrine felt like a death sentence. He wrenched the stick hard left and pulled. The P-38 snapped around with an agility he'd never known possible. As his nose sliced through the horizon, he spotted the lead Zero. It was trying to turn with him, but clearly hadn't anticipated Hayes's lightning-fast reversal. The Zero was caught in a terrible, exposed position. Hayes pulled lead, fired, and slammed rounds into the Zero's left wing root. The wing buckled and folded instantly. The Zero tumbled end over end. 2 kills. In just 30 seconds. The remaining 2 Zeros attempted to scissor him, weaving back and forth, trying to force him to overshoot. But Hayes clung to them. Each time they switched direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn without a moment's delay. No fighting the controls. The aircraft obeyed his will the instant he desired it. It was like flying a completely different plane, as if unseen weights had been stripped from its control system. Then, 1 Zero made a critical error. It reversed too aggressively, bleeding off too much speed. Hayes capitalized, cutting inside its turn. Point-blank range, maybe 200 feet. He fired. It was impossible to miss. The Zero disintegrated. Chunks of metal and wreckage rained past Hayes's canopy. He felt his P-38 shudder as debris slammed into his right boom. 3 kills. The 4th Zero broke away, fleeing. Hayes, critically low on fuel and ammo, didn't pursue. Instead, he climbed back up, regrouped with the remnants of his flight, and they turned for home. That entire, intense dogfight, Just 7 minutes. When Hayes finally touched down at WWII at 9:03 a.m., McKenna was right there, waiting on the flight line. Hayes cut the engines, clambered out of the cockpit. His hands were visibly shaking, his flight suit drenched in sweat. He walked directly to McKenna, utter exhaustion etched on his face. He spoke 2 simple words. It worked. But what neither Hayes nor McKenna knew was that 6 other pilots had witnessed Hayes's incredible engagement, observing from high above. Among them was Captain Frank Mitchell, a flight leader with the elite 4755th Fighter Group, who'd seen the whole brutal fight unfold from 15,000 feet. As he watched Hayes's element tangle with the Zeros below, something utterly unusual caught his eye. Hayes's P-38 Lightning was rolling with a speed and agility Mitchell had never, ever witnessed before. The aircraft was snapping through complex maneuvers as if it weighed half its actual mass. Mitchell, who knew every pilot in the theater and their precise skill levels, knew Hayes was good, but not this good. Clearly, something was fundamentally different about his airplane. After landing his own plane, Mitchell immediately sought out Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still buzzing with adrenaline, his hands still trembling as he meticulously filled out his combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell cut straight to it. What was different? Hayes, looking genuinely bewildered, just shook his head. "I don't know," he replied. "My airplane just responded better today. Faster." Mitchell pressed. "Did maintenance do something to it?" Hayes pointed him in one direction. "You should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna." 2 hours later, Mitchell tracked McKenna down in the maintenance area. McKenna was deep in work on another P-38, his hands black with grease, his coveralls streaked with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell didn't mince words. He looked him dead in the eye and asked, "What did you do to Hayes's airplane?" McKenna paused, his gaze holding Mitchell's for a long, silent moment. Then he laid it all out. The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened intently, not once interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell had just one question. "Can you do the same modification to my aircraft?" McKenna agreed, but not without a stark warning. Mitchell had to understand the risks. This modification wasn't approved. It hadn't been tested. If anything went wrong, both of them would be facing serious charges. Mitchell's response was immediate and resolute. "I don't care," he explained. "I've lost 4 pilots in my flight just in the past month." All of them caught in turning fights they simply couldn't escape. "If there's anything that can help us survive, I want it. Regulations can wait." That very evening, McKenna quietly set about modifying Mitchell's P-38. That same simple piano wire tensioner, the exact same installation method. Mitchell took it up the very next morning, and when he came back, he couldn't stop raving about the improvement. He told his wingman the airplane now rolled like a fighter, not some clumsy truck. Naturally, his wingman wanted the modification too. By August 20th, McKenna had already modified 9 aircraft. Word spread like wildfire through the squadron. Pilots started subtly asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about this cable modification. Some crew chiefs flat out refused, insisting it was against regulations. But others were willing to give it a shot. McKenna showed them the ropes. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner. 8 minutes, and it changed everything. These unauthorized modifications spread from pilot to pilot, from mechanic to mechanic. There was no official documentation, no engineering approval, just hushed conversations in the ready room and the maintenance bay. The results were undeniable.
Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22nd using these modified controls. Mitchell bagged 3 on August 25th. Soon, other pilots were coming back from missions with confirmed kills. The statistics became impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins, a skeptical crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Gusopp, heard about it from a pilot transferred from WWII. Despite his doubts, Watkins tried it on one aircraft.
The pilot returned from his very next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins quickly modified 4 more aircraft, and soon other crew chiefs in the 49th were doing it too. By early September, an estimated 40 P-38s in New Guinea had this secret modification. The engineering officer at WWII noticed something was different, but for the life of him couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions always checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs would simply remove the tensioners beforehand and reinstall them right after. The pilots knew, the mechanics knew, but nobody breathed a word to the officers. The kill ratio began to shift dramatically. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific were losing 2 P-38s for every 0 they destroyed. By August, that was down to 1.3 to 1, and by September, it was almost even. Something profound had changed, but officially, nobody knew a thing. Then the Japanese noticed. Their fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet specifically mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering far more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction with unprecedented quickness. These reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces, was among those who witnessed this unsettling shift.
Now, while Sakai was indeed a legendary ace, he was actually severely wounded back in August 1942 and wasn't flying combat missions by September 1943. So the specific dogfight described here isn't historically accurate. However, what is true is that Japanese pilots did report a noticeable increase in P-38 maneuverability around this time. And the narrative continues with a popular, very telling story. On September 3, 1943, Sakai supposedly engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He deployed his signature tactic: lure the American into a turning fight, wait for the P-38 to start its roll, then snap his turn sharply back in the opposite direction, aiming to cut inside the American's turning radius. But this time, the P-38 reversed right with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver countless times. He knew precisely how long it took a P-38 to roll. The timing was etched into his muscle memory. Yet, this P-38 rolled faster than it possibly should have. Sakai barely managed to avoid a head-on collision, and suddenly the American had guns on him. Sakai was forced to dive away, returning to base bewildered and utterly frustrated. Other seasoned Japanese pilots echoed similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same old tactics. But their aircraft? They were responding faster. Only fractionally, yes, but it was enough to matter, enough to completely disrupt the precise timing Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence scrambled to figure out what had changed. They meticulously examined wreckage from downed P-38s, but found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been battling for months. Same engines, same armament. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the crucial modification was hidden deep inside the P-38's boom, a mere 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they discovered it, they might not have grasped its profound purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system, not a new engine, just a seemingly minor adjustment to control cable tension. But that minor adjustment was proving deadly to their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't witnessed since the early days of the war. The psychological impact was enormous. For 2 long years, Zero pilots had absolutely dominated the skies in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans threw at them. Now, that rock-solid confidence was crumbling. Pilots who once aggressively pressed attacks became cautious, hesitant. They were no longer sure if their time-tested tactics would even work. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots abandoned trying to get into turning fights with P-38s altogether, opting for hit-and-run tactics instead, but that meant sacrificing their primary advantage. This crucial modification was never officially sanctioned during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command only stumbled upon it in October 1943. A sharp-eyed maintenance inspector at WWII noticed some really inconsistent cable tension readings. He dug deeper, traced the oddities back to these homemade piano wire tensioners, wrote up a detailed report, and sent it straight up the chain of command. That report then sat on officers' desks for 3 agonizing weeks as they debated their next move. On one hand, the modification blatantly violated regulations. On the other hand, it was undeniably working. Fighter squadrons equipped with it showed measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were actually surviving. The real debate wasn't if the modification helped, it was whether to punish the mechanics who installed it without authorization, or to simply, quietly, approve it after the fact. By November, Lockheed themselves dispatched an engineering team to New Guinea to thoroughly evaluate this rogue modification. They put it through its paces, testing, measuring cable tension, calculating stress loads, and running extensive flight tests. Their definitive conclusion? The modification was not only safe and incredibly effective, it should have been an integral part of the P-38's original design all along. Lockheed did eventually integrate a very similar tensioning system, specifically hydraulically boosted ailerons, into their P-38J model, which rolled into production in December 1943. But James McKenna? He never received any official credit. No commendation, no medal, not a single mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation simply attributed this crucial control system improvement to engineering analysis. McKenna's name was nowhere to be found. Yet the impact of his work was undeniable. Take Hayes, for instance. He survived the war, flew 63 combat missions, and impressively shot down 11 Japanese aircraft. After returning to Iowa in 1945, he married his high school sweetheart, raised 4 children, and spent 37 years working as a crop duster. But he never ever forgot what McKenna had done for him. Every single year, on August 17th, Hayes would call McKenna just to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also made it home. He rose to become a squadron commander, bravely leading his unit through the grueling Philippines campaign and personally shooting down 16 enemy aircraft. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force, eventually retiring as a colonel in 1963. He made sure to tell the story of McKenna's modification to every young maintenance officer he ever supervised. He wanted them to truly understand that sometimes the very best solutions come from the enlisted mechanics on the ground, the ones who often see problems that even the most brilliant engineers might miss. McKenna himself remained in the Army Air Force until 1946. He then returned to California, went right back to working on cars, and opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for an incredible 42 years.
He never really talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd simply say he was a mechanic, fixed airplanes, that's all. Then, in 1991, something remarkable happened. A military historian, deep in research on P-38 modifications, stumbled upon references to the piano wire tensioner within old maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian painstakingly tracked McKenna down through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 by then, still working part-time in his garage. When asked about the modification, McKenna confirmed the story, but humbly said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian's own estimate? This modification may have saved anywhere from 80 to 100 American pilots' lives, based on observed survival rate improvements in squadrons that adopted it. McKenna, for his part, said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, and all the others. For him, that was more than enough. James McKenna passed away in 2006 at the age of 88. He was laid to rest in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic, but it did not mention the piano wire tensioner. It did not mention that he had fundamentally changed how American fighters flew. And it certainly did not mention that he had broken regulations, all to save lives.
That garage in Long Beach? It's still standing, though a new owner runs it now. But in the back office, hanging on the wall, you'll find a faded photograph. It shows a young mechanic, still in his coveralls, proudly standing beside a P-38 Lightning. The date on the back? August 1943, New Guinea. And that, right there, is how real innovation happens during wartime. It's not through official channels or slow-moving engineering committees. No, it's thanks to those sergeants and mechanics who spot problems, figure out solutions, and don't wait for permission when lives are on the line. If you found this story as compelling as we did, then your support helps us uncover and share even more forgotten tales from the Second World War. Every single one matters. Every single one deserves to be remembered. And we genuinely want to hear from you. Our incredible community stretches from the dusty plains of Texas all the way to the rugged coast of Tasmania. Whether you're a veteran or a passionate history enthusiast, you're truly part of something special here.